Part of the club. Hey, folks, Captain Mike here from Salty Cape for this week's Salty Cape podcast with Captain Dave Paros, aka the Dave and Mike Show. And this is a podcast where we start with the intentions of talking about the fishing reports this week, but we'll likely divulge into techniques, etiquettes, various chop busting between old friends, some pointers, and anything else we can think of. Afternoon, Dave. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Mike. Yeah, tired, but what else is new, right?
Were you out this morning?
I did. Yeah, I went out into Nantucket and Vineyard Sound. Did not expect the level of wind that we ran into. I actually spoke to Bob Lewis. He's down at Monomoy right now, and he said it's sporty there as well. So, but the best part of it feels like a fall day. Feels like
It does.
late
Yeah,
September.
I feel like I can safely mow my lawn tonight without worrying about it dying.
There you go.
And yeah, so
Yeah.
I think this week, let's just talk about the week in review. Go through the some of the reports over the course of the week, and sure we'll have some good stuff come up. And you were out today. I'm very curious about that. And we'll take a look at the weather for this weekend and see what trouble we can get into in the process.
Oh, yeah, we can do that.
So I'm trying to remember early this week. I think we were both out. Yeah, I'll let you kick it off. Start the week off, and I'll interrupt when I'm remembering stuff I saw when I was out there. We'll just take it from there.
Well, I think we both can start with I was at Monomoy yesterday, and you were at Monomoy earlier in the week. And hey, I would say right now you got to give it an A plus.
No brainer. I was out Tuesday. Tuesday was calling for what, northwest winds, but it was more of a north wind. And I run out of Falmouth. You're a trailer guy, so you have it easier in that respect. But I did the shortest line between 2 points coming out of Falmouth Harbor, which takes me out a ways, and I got really beat up in the process. In hindsight, I should have known better and hung the shoreline to stay in the lee of the land a little bit. But it was sporty getting to Monomoy. They were calling 10 to 15, but it was more than that. But once we got there, it was life everywhere. And I was really impressed by the mix of bait. There were definitely sand eels there, birds and stripers doing the whole sand eel thing. And then in the rips, we saw plenty of popping squid and stripers scratching those. So I saw both strolling hooking up, jigging hooking up, and casting hooking up. We were casting. But yeah, it was just like you put it best, A plus.
Yeah. Yeah, but I was excited about was your report with the surface eraser. It seems like all season long I've been beating the drum, the charter grade popper and the sliders, and they certainly work. And the original hoagies and things like that. And I've got my surface erasers and I'm ready to rock and roll. But when you have got something else on your rod and it immediately hooks up, it's hard to say, well, I'm going to try something different because what you're using is working. And I know you're a big surface eraser guy. I've had some good results on it. And yeah, I think that what I was excited about was listening to you about the versatility. I mean, when I wrote up your report a little bit, you get an F for not writing up your report, by the way. Okay. Yeah, I forgot. Mikey
Yeah, I'm
said,
having
my
flashbacks
God, my report. Harley gave the report.
Flashbacks to high school and college.
Yeah. Harley gave my report. No, it's the versatility. I mean, you're talking about a plug that can do multiple things. And we're both big soft plastic guys, but we also recognize that soft plastics, well, the famous Mike Hogan line is bluefish ever his business partner. But the reality is that with soft plastics, if they get beat up, the Hogan plastic.
And they're high maintenance a little bit too, right? So you got to rig them. And if you're casting a wind, they don't punch the wind as well as a jig or a small plug might. And I've spent a lot of years sight casting for tarpon in the Keys, for example. Every once in a while, a hook will sort of unrig itself mid cast. Right. And that usually only happens when often happens when you're sight casting to something you're super excited about. And, where I'm using the surface erasers, I'm fishing them quite a bit like a sock bait and, all the same techniques. But, I like to say it has the casting range of a jig. It's got the buoyancy of suspending soft bait, and it's got the fishiness of a sock bait. And so to me, I'm using that lure in a soft bait situation, but I have some casting range with it. And so it's sort of an unusual lure to have those sort of filters to it.
Yeah. So, I mean, Monomoy is great. No question. We were out there yesterday. I was with Olivia Dinkelacker and Grace Castleberry. Here's a couple names. They're scientists from UMass Amherst, and we were doing Olivia's working on her PhD. Grace has hers. And we had a good day. I mean, although I got to say, once again, I had to ask them this question as scientists. I said, is meteorology a science, or is meteorology like astrology? Because, man, I tell you, this week they got the wind wrong, even today. I mean, it's almost like you have to stick your nose out the jetties at Falmouth Harbor and go yourself to see what it's going to be.
Yes, and so that's a really good point. So I grew up working at Patriot Boats here in Falmouth. So I made it on the Minuteman, the Patriot 2, and a lot of charters. And when I ran a charter boat earlier on, it was through the operation. Wonderful family fishing setup there. But a lot of times folks will call about the weather, and we'd always say, if you're close enough, let's just stop by and just what you said, Dave, is poke your nose out. Because the weather forecast is often wrong in a positive direction in terms of boating conditions, right? And that happened yesterday, right? It was, I know a lot of people grounded themselves yesterday, but those who got out caught plenty of fish offshore. It was a nice day, and I think anyway. And
I would say if you were in the right size boat. I mean, yesterday for me, going out, because we didn't leave the dock until noontime. And I was expecting the wind, because that's what the forecast was. The wind was going to drop off at noontime, middle of the day. Oh, let's go at noontime. We won't get beat up. Well, it didn't drop. It only got worse as the day went on. But we ran the east side of Monomoy back up and came in via that way, and that saved us, because we kept looking at the point, having to go around the corner into the sound, and it was like, which leads me to a suggestion. Okay. And I've written it numerous times. If you're going out in the center console, an open boat, Mike, you can see Mike has a T-top. His boat is much bigger than mine. Mine has no T-top. However, if you're going on an open center console and you don't bring foul weather gear with you, shame on you. Okay. It doesn't, I wear Grundens, I wear commercial grade stuff because I don't believe in all the other stuff. I know companies like Sims, Patagonia, other ones do great job, fantastic stuff. At the very least, pack it. Okay, you don't have to wear it, but have it. Because when you're on an open boat and you take a wave, and I know Mike is like I am, there's nothing worse than soaking a customer or a friend, and then the rest of the day is shot. Really, because you're gonna get cold. Okay, even in the summertime.
It's brutal. For example, say you're bombing down the sound in one of these big, massive Freemans that does, 80 knots, as Terry Nugent was saying. He got one up to the other day, which is not for me, but he's happy. But what Terry and I were both talking about, it doesn't matter what kind of machine you're in. A beam C is a beam C, and you're getting wet, whether you're in a 18-foot maritime skiff like we both fished for dozens of years in, or a big go fast center console. BC is going to soak you. And foul weather gear was definitely a friend to deal with the surprises this week. And I keep a couple sets in my boat too, just for that reason. I'd rather me get wet than my guests too. Yeah. It's hard. Okay. Can't win them all.
Yeah. So to continue the report.
Let's bounce back. Let's start from the bridges and out. We've hit Monomoy. Monomoy's good. You can't mess that up. Canal. Let's start with the canal. Let's go from the bridge out.
It's not canal. The canal is okay for real canal fishermen. Okay, we are definitely seeing so far a year in which, if you know what you're doing, you put your time in, you don't mind jigging, and you don't mind night fishing, you'll catch fish.
And when you say jigging, that's sort of fishing the swing while jigging in canal terms.
Yeah,
working the jig as you cast up tide and jigging it back. Yep.
And whether using, paddle tails like a Hoagie Pro Tail, or you're using bucktail jigs, whatever.
And I'm not a big canal fisherman. Again, I respect it. Just, your brain can only handle so much, so many different things you can focus on. But heavy stuff this time of year too with the June tides, right?
Oh, yeah.
Guys are throwing 4, 5, and even 6-ounce jigs.
Oh, absolutely. I was talking with Jeff Miller at Canal Bait and Tackle, and one of his source of frustration is people come in with rods they bought somewhere else. It's a 9-foot rod and it's rated for 1 to 3 or 1 to 4. And he says, well, you need to use a 5-ounce jig. And they have bought the wrong setup. And 5 ounces, 6 ounces is a lid. I mean, that's a lot of, and you need a certain kind of equipment, and the canal is unique in that regard. So, and there's a lot of technique to it, more than what people think. But that is definitely, last weekend, there was a little bit of a topwater bite, but it hasn't been a great topwater season, and if you remember, I can't remember my dates anymore. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, everybody was a YouTube hero posting videos of a half an hour catching bass in the canal on magic swimmers and
falling out of the sky. And
yeah, right, exactly. And those guys aren't even fishing. They're just sitting around waiting for someone to tell them that the fish showed up. The real canal guys are the guys who are out there, and they're going to work for their fish. They work hard. They lose a lot of sleep.
And I love that about the canal. I'm a highly obsessive angler. Because I don't fish the canal doesn't mean I don't like it and respect it. But those salty men and women, I know some ladies that do it.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, get there at 3 a.m. to hit the tide just right, fish in the dark, losing all kinds of sleep. And a lot of these folks will fish from 3 to whatever, get breakfast. Leo's, I think, is the big hangout, they go to work all day. It's amazing. And
they really are.
And so I just wanted to comment on that. It's definitely a neat fishery, very unique. I can't think of. I've fished all over the country, and a little bit the world, and I have yet to find a fishery that's as unique as that hardcore canal as you describe it. It's pretty cool.
No question. So it's okay, but the fish aren't gonna, like you said, they're not gonna fall out of the sky. You're gonna have to work for them. Okay.
Yeah. So real fishing.
That's
real fishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one
real fishing. Yeah.
The one thing that's interesting about the canal is that they have had at the west end some big bluefish, which
that's cool. That's cool.
So we'll get to that, the whole subject of bluefish, which is kind of interesting. So where do you want to go? East to Cape Cod Bay or south?
Let's say Cape Cod Bay, and then we'll go around. We've already hit Monomoy and then back up the Sounds. And
Cape Cod Bay was an interesting week. Apparently, there are schools of pogies, and the bass are feeding on them, but they've been moving. They were up in Plymouth one day, the Manamet area. Then they showed up off of Sandwich. Then we got the wind in and broke up the schools. So there's a little bit of that. I would say tube and worm is still working.
Yeah, you said that last week that Jeff Miller, Canal Bait and Tackle, was saying he couldn't keep them in stock. And I looked at the numbers. I'm like, holy cow. Dave's not kidding. And that run on, in our case, the Hoagie Perfect tube has been nonstop since. Yeah. And so if you look at my shipping that tube bite's definitely alive and well still, especially the addresses that, the shops and addresses we're shipping to.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So, I mean, that's good. Both
the thing I like about tube and worm fishing, you made a comment that there's pogies in the Sound and stripers in the Sound, in the Bay. I'm sorry. You made the comment that there's stripers and pogie moving around in the Bay. What I like about tube and worm fishing is its highly tactical nature. You're by and
Mhm.
large, at least in my opinion, you're targeting resident fish around structure.
Right.
So if there's fish moving around, as long as you're trolling in a fishy area with structure that's holding a food chain, even if you have bad fishing reports, you're still in the game, at least in my opinion, all
Sure.
throughout the entire striper season, focusing on fish, on structure. And tubing is probably the easiest, most accessible way to repeatedly pound structure while trolling. And so
No question. No question.
it's a good skill to have mastered.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And so apparently, Amy over at the sports board, she actually sent us a report and she said that she's been getting some good news from Sandy Neck of people catching smaller bass from the shore. And I talked Captain Paul Caruso. He told me that he's been in Barnstable Harbor. And again, I mean, and I think what's important for me, and you've known me way too well that I can be a contrarian. And to me, it's like, okay, define small fish. Well, Paul said 24-inch fish. To me, 24-inch fish, you're talking to a kid who never caught a striped bass till he was in high school because there weren't any around where I was fishing. 24-inch fish, okay, I make a living on 24-inch fish. When I was guiding, I made a lot of money taking people to Barnstable Harbor, to wherever it might be. And you know what? 24-inch fish for a lot of people might be the biggest fish they ever caught. Okay.
Yeah, I don't even like talking about size with fishing,
Yeah.
with fish. The because like a lot of it is setting and context too. You know what I mean? So you mentioned folks at Bostable Harbor from shore down by Sandy Neck. Now, if you have just a light little 7-foot outfit and a little like 3-inch popper, a little jig or whatever, like a
Hey,
24-inch fish is the target. It's awesome, and like in a previous life, I too was a fly fishing guide, and that's a nice fish, and everyone's happy. You're using light gear. It's very interactive, and it's a lot of it is context and setting, right? And
right. Oh, absolutely.
24-inch, like a 24-inch bonefish on the same gear is like fish of a life, and it's all relative too.
Yeah, exactly. But I was excited to hear that there were what people now classify as smaller fish, because honestly, the season started off with big fish. I mean, people are telling me, "Oh, my first fish of the year was 34 inches up inside Great Pond, up inside Papaneset." I was like, "That's not normal," I mean, so it was good to hear that, and
that's also good news, because I remember from last week those sort of fish hadn't really settled into those kind of areas, and
right.
So that's a big improvement. I'm happy to.
Huge.
That is good news.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amy, for that update. That's fantastic.
Definitely. Yeah. The rest of Cape Cod Bay, I don't know. I've heard Billingsgate, has been slow. A lot of the boats that fish Race Point, that area, or the backside up that area, a number of them I've seen down at Monomoy. I think that says something about the fishery up that way a little bit. The fact that they're having to make the run all the way down the backside. So, I would say it's a mixed bag. And I'm going to say one thing about the pogie schools, because you and I, we talk about bait versus lures and stuff, and we're going to get into eels in a little bit. Yeehaw. A favorite subject of them, Captain Mikey and Captain Grumpy. And that is that you said about the tube and worm. And Jeff Miller said, one of the problems with the pogies is you got to find them. You get a couple of windy days, like it's been out of the north today. It was out of the north Tuesday, right? Isn't it, right? Wasn't it Tuesday you went to Monomoy? Yeah.
Tuesday. Yep.
Yeah. And apparently that stirred them all up, and the guys couldn't find the bait. The guys who were set up to troll, whether they were tube and worm or they were using deep diving swimmers, caught fish. So that's the problem with bait. Okay. Yeah. Okay. If you want to snag and drop, that's how you do it. You got to find the bait first.
So in our playbooks, we decompose things a little differently than bait versus. And so structure is sort of the first tier of how we decompose a situation. And so what you're staying in Captain Mike's playbook terms is open water fishing. and fish in open water, whether it's pogies or sand eels. If there's no structure to anchor a food chain, you're sort of at the whim of either the predators or the prey, and wind and environmental factors, mostly with wind and tide and those sort of things.
Yeah. Well, the other thing.
Sorry to sidetrack you.
Was it you who? Was it you? I can't remember who mentioned to me that sometimes the bait is the structure in open water fishing. I mean,
yes, 100%. Yeah,
it was you. It was the structure, and I was like, wow. Another brilliant comment from Mike Hogan. Okay, yeah, you don't have rocks, you don't have shoals, you don't have it's open water, and so what is the thing that's going to hold the fish? The bait. However, the problem with bait is it moves. Structure generally stays still.
So you got wind, you got tide, even lighting changes can mess up bait. I'm convinced, if it goes from bright to dark or dark to bright, or the especially the smaller the bait, I feel like the more vulnerable they are to any sort of environmental change, pressure up, pressure down, little water temperature on a big tide in the canal, in the Cape Cod Bay, especially. All right. So Cape Cod Bay, we've got moving pogies, tube and worm and structure.
And
light tackle fish, as we say, have come in. Yeah. And we've worked around the Cape. On the backside, I've heard there are some fish on the backside. I don't know much about those rumors, but I think if you were to run the backside and look for gulls and marks, you'd find them. Again, I don't.
As I said, as I said, the backside, the beaches, real quick. Again, the beaches and the backside are the same thing as the canal. Okay, the difference in the canal and the backside beaches is accessibility. Okay, canal's easily accessed. I mean, it's one great thing about the canal. Okay, you can get there. The backside is not as accessible. There are fish there, and the guys who work at it catch fish. You hear all the time, the seals. Yeah, the seals have an impact, no question. I mean, no one can argue that seals. But, I was in Stage Harbor in Monomoy yesterday, and there were a couple of schools of pogies, and there were the seals eating the pogies. That's what seals want. Seals don't want to chase striped bass. The reason they chase your striped bass is because it's easy to catch. Generally, seals aren't running around chasing bluefish or striped bass. Okay, they are waiting for you to hook it, injure it, or whatever, and then they'll take it off your line. Thank you very much. Okay, I mean, kind of makes sense to me. But so there are fish there, but you're going to have to work at it. You talked about Monomoy. Oh, it was really cool.
Go ahead.
Oh, really cool. Actually, we talked about this. Is the one thing about Monomoy, that whole area, all those rips and stuff. There are two things. One is the slack tide fishing. Okay, everybody.
I want to talk about slack tide. Go ahead, but just no. Go ahead. Yeah, I just had a light bulb.
No, I mean there was always it's just like when I was a kid. You couldn't catch striped bass in the day. You had to catch them at night. Okay, there were certain old rules, and that may be because that's the way people fished. I don't know. And the other one was that you grab a drink and a sandwich at slack tide. No point in fishing. And I tell you what, I've had more people tell me this year that they fish through slack tide, and the one plug that does it every single time is the dog walker. Okay, both the regular Hoagie dog walker and the Mongo, the XL. For whatever reason, that movement of that plug at slack tide raises fish, and the biggest fish. That's the other thing that's so cool.
I was about to say, my entire life, and I'm not a big size guy, but all my biggest fish have been at slack tide, around structure of some sort, and all of them, and anything. I'm talking big fish. All my. It always seems to be slack tide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. So it's really cool,
But it's funny, just when you get a theory, and this is me, and I swear I'm not doing this to needle your theory, which I will probably later in this podcast because it's what I do, is needle Dave. But so we were at Monomoy on Tuesday, and fish the top water, like the tardigrade amber's been the color this year. But the amber top water plugs, whether it was the pop or the dog walkers, was working well. But we were far east on Monomoy by Versus, and the tide had slacked off, and the top water bite went down. And that's when I started kicking everybody's butt with the little teeny surface eraser. And I was casting that, fishing it. I call it the needlefish retrieve, where it's just a slow, steady retrieve with a periodic twitch in the retrieve. And I was catching, like an entire school of call it 34 to 38 inch fish would just come in in slow motion with the fish I had hooked. But if you were throwing a topwater plug, you would have thought they were gone. But a really slow retrieve with a tiny little lure, just super slow. Just I had enough retrieve speed to keep it, within 2 or 3 feet of the surface with a tip up. And that was my measurement. And then I would pause and do the little tick like you would of the needlefish. And all of a sudden I would have a fish on it. It was like all in slow motion. It was really cool and really wild. But yeah, so just when you think you have a theory cracked with striped bass, they go and like mess with you. And
I think that you made a good point. And Bob Lewis we were talking again one day when we're doing this, we're helping out these scientists with this data thing. Basically, if the fish is big enough or they want a certain size fish, they put this logger on the fish. It's like a bridle, and they free spool a reel and let the fish.
And again, this is these are the scientists that you and Bob take out periodically to help with survivability.
Olivia and Grace, and you spoke to Olivia yesterday. Super important research, just like the thing that in Massachusetts.
Big time.
A lot of good stuff going on in science. The key thing we need to do now, real quick, we got to convince the managers to go with what the scientists say. Okay. And that's a problem, but I'm not going to go in that direction. But I even forget what direction I was going, and you can tell.
Okay. Scientist, a slack tide.
Scientist. Yeah. So what you do is she free spools and the fish swims off for 20 minutes. Okay. And it takes a lot of line. Well, you can't fish when that fish is swimming off. So Bob was going out last week, Bob Lewis, and he said, you know what? I'm going to take some fluke gear. Okay. You can't cast because you might hook the braided line that's out with the fish. And they caught 24 fluke, a number of legal size fluke at Monomoy fishing because what you're doing is you're drifting, with the current. And they were, bottom fishing. And all I kept thinking of, the Mike Hogan, Captain Mike's plan B. Okay. I mean, yeah, we don't let the fish swim like that, but if you don't have that gear with you, you can't take advantage of that scenario. And that's like, you talk about the Hoagie system in the storage thing, but you've always got jigs in yours. Okay. You've got
jigs and I have teasers too. So the fish are keyed on little stuff, right? And we call them the jig beaky rigs, but and so just having a little something for everybody. When I say everybody, I'm talking the fish. And I'm out there to catch fish and have a good time. And if my plan goes one way but the fish go another, I have no shame. I'm gonna roll with the punches. And I'm just happy to be out there,
because that's going to be a subject for this is some of the subject. If you, this is a suggestion. I've been giving Mike suggestions for ideas, and one of them at some point we want to talk about what do you tell someone who's never gone on a tuna trip what to expect if they caught striped bass, if they've caught bluefish, they've caught all that good stuff. What do you tell them about a tuna trip? And we'll get into that. And because, like you said, there's something for everybody. But in this case, one person's holding the rod and the fish is swimming off. Everybody else is standing around for 20 minutes or so, doing nothing. So, they started fluke fishing and they did really well. They caught some big sea bass. So, I mean, what a great idea, but I mean, that's again, goes into that Hoagie playbook of plan B. Have a plan B, plan A.
And that lends to what I like so much about Monomoy too. And I said earlier, I guess I was very striped bass centric in my comment. There's something for everybody: casting, jigging, trolling. But Monomoy has everything in what we're going to call it, like a 2 by 4 mile rectangle of fishy water. There's lack of better, I don't know. Yeah. But you've got excellent fluke fishing, big sea bass, and my favorite eating fish, believe it or not, inshore here are scup, big scup. They're delicious. And especially if you cook them right. But it's just a cool spot. There's something for everybody there. And the tide goes slack. You can change your techniques and, downsize or upsize. And if you're in Dave's camp, ground fish, whatever. So I think now's a good time to shift gears to the Sounds, Vineyard and Nantucket Sound, and working around the corner, heading back that way, and spend hot in all the rips up until this week. I didn't fish the Sounds this week all that much, and I've talked to a lot of folks that have, but I know you have been out yourself in the Sounds. Just curious what your thoughts are on the Sounds.
Do you want to start with the good or the not so good? What do you want to start with?
Let's start with the not so good. Start with the bad. End with the good.
Well, and it's to me, all fishing is good. But the question, and Amy raised this question, and she said,
Amy from Sportsport.
I mean, where are the bluefish? And how I am about bluefish. I love bluefish. People, we have so many striped bass. I mean, they recovered. Everybody, bass, and they do this. Oh, it's a bluefish. I want to throw people off my boat when they have that. Oh, it's a bluefish.
I love. All jokes aside, owning a lure company with a lot of people using live fluoroliters, I love bluefish. I grew up as fishing through the same era you were fishing. I grew up saltwater fishing through the 80s and early 90s. So some of the greatest striped bass fishermen of all time, their brochures changed to say bluefish chart, and like that's how few bluefish there were. And that was the striped bass of the 80s and early 90s. And they were just cool. And I'll tell you, the hardest fish to catch on the planet is a bluefish when you specifically need to catch a bluefish for that dinner that night. And they can be tricky. And, and my favorite fishing book of all time is actually technically a fiction book, Blues by John Hershey. And have you read Blues by John Hershey?
Oh, it's a great book. Read it 3 or 4 times.
And it gives you it gives you local history, entomology of what's swimming below. It's an amazing book. And then also, like, it's just a fun fish.
Mike, hold on, time out. In all fairness, the reason you like the book is he gives you all the recipes, and we know that the Mike Hogan lives by his stomach.
Okay, don't go
there. So, what's your favorite?
Okay, real quick. Here's my all-time favorite recipe. Dave's at fault if you're not a cooking. You don't want to hear about my recipe. Fresh bluefish, filleted, skinned, and the red meat cut out best you can. Debone, little bones at the head of the fillet. Cut them up in a 1-inch or like fish and chip size strips. Marinate them in. I'm gonna call it 3 parts soy to 1 part dry vermouth, but play with it. Fresh chopped ginger. Fresh chopped scallions. I debate on whether I put fresh dill or not. The recipe in the book calls for dill. So I got garlic, scallions, and fresh chopped ginger. The book has it overnight, but 3 or 4 hours is all I need for that marinade. And the difference between what the book does and what I do is I will dredge those marinated pieces of bluefish in pancake batter before deep frying them in peanut oil. But the author, John Hershey, in his recipe, he puts them in flour and then the pancake batter. And that'll make it like a chicken finger at a Chinese restaurant.
Right.
If I skip that flour stage, and it's very unique, it's not puffy like a chicken finger at a Chinese restaurant, and it cooks in like a minute. And if people ask me, well, you have one last meal, it's the teriyaki bluefish cooked the way I do it, passing on the flour dredge. But it's excellent. Sorry, little debrief there, but Dave said the food word.
And you made a good point. The thing about bluefish is it's all about how you take care of the fish. Okay, when you bring a bluefish on the boat and you're going to eat it, you have to bleed it, you want to gut it, and you want to put it in an ice slurry, which basically is just some crushed ice or just ice cubes, little salt water.
I don't even gut mine, but I ice them and bleed them like you said. But I personally gut them. If that's I'm a neat freak on my boat. I err on the side of my boat a little bit with that.
Yeah, except when you're catching tuna, but that's okay. No, because they were great fish, but it's because people don't like them. Well, some people just don't like darker meat fish. I get it. Or
And then the other thing, the angling thing, I think context matters too. I think some people are bothered by if they're targeting one fish and they catch another.
Good point.
That's weird. It feels like a fail. Versus if you were targeting bluefish and caught a bluefish, I'll be say crab ledge for example, and jigging for or trolling or targeting tuna. I could accidentally catch a 50-pound striped bass. Of course, I'm out of the zone and everything like that. But it's highly, I'm targeting tuna. I'm annoyed by that 50-pound striped bass. Now, if I caught that same fish on purpose, 15 miles closer to shore, I'd be telling everybody for weeks. You know what I mean? Right. It's funny how context matters, and that's just.
So that's a question I've been asked. Where are the bluefish? It seems that all I keep hearing is that bluefish are incidental catches. So far, it's just been tough. And you mentioned about bluefish. You can't catch a bluefish. We're in sharking season, the shore sharking thing, which is kind of I think it's a relatively recent phenomenon. I mean, there were all guys who did it for, really hardcore, especially on the Vineyard and Nantucket. And it's kind of on the Cape. And the one thing that there are two baits that guys use for sharks, and one of them is bluefish. And, a lot of times they go to the beach and think, that's not a problem, we'll catch bluefish. And you chunk them up for bait for sharks, and they can't get a bluefish. So you always want to make sure you have eels. And not dead eels. That's the other thing too. Is people think sharks are like that. They're not particular. Well, sharks aren't going to eat rancid bait. Okay, if when someone says I'm fishing dead eels for sharks, they're talking fresh dead. They're not talking about they went in the store and got the eels that were in the eel tank that have rigor mortis from 4 days. The eyes are falling out there. Even a shark's going to look at that and go, So
eels that have been iced to be that way.
Exactly.
Because it's a little easier to fish with a dead eel than an eel that's going to want to tie itself in a knot on your leader.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's really why they're fishing it dead. So it's the same eel, but not problematically mischievous.
And it's really cool. It's a good fishery. I mean, you need big equipment. It's, but you're talking about catching a fish from the beach that, they again, I'm sure the Chamber of Tourists or whatever, Chamber of Tourism or whatever they call the thing, wouldn't want us to say it, but at night on the beaches from Falmouth all the way down to Chatham, there are some big sharks, not gray whites.
Brown sharks. And I remember even as my son's age, he's 14. And when I was 14, I remember kids were fishing for brown shark. They've been here this whole time. No one gets bitten by, it's a non-Chamber of Commerce issue.
Yeah. So, I'm being facetious, but right now there are still some small bass around in the salt ponds. The water is warmed up. One thing.
So now we're talking about the sounds now at this point.
Yeah, the sounds, the backwaters, Wacoit Bay, the salt ponds in Falmouth. The one advantage as you go further east is that because of the impact of Monomoy and being a little closer to the open Atlantic, a lot of times the rivers down that way stay maybe a little bit cooler, so you have a better chance. But right now, if you're going to fish, Bourne's Pond, you're going to fish Wacoit, you're going to fish Papaneset, the three bays. It's first light and evening. Okay, during the daytime. I mean, first of all,
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
I mean, boat traffic, the whole thing. So they're out there. But the blue fishing from the beaches, which is, it just is not, and it's not even good from the boats. So that was Amy's question. Amy's told me that people asked that question, where are the bluefish? She did say.
Have you talked to anybody that sniffed out horseshoe shoal? Is that horseshoe shoal?
I did. What I'm sort of excited about is that this weekend, the Austin Anglers Club is holding their Lady Show Troll tomorrow, which is a great event. All the proceeds go towards breast cancer research. It's a great, and it's a good program. Yeah. It's a very good, and they actually have an award for I don't know if they call her the queen of the shoal, or or the queen of the horseshoe, but it's for the biggest bluefish that comes from Horseshoe Shoal. So a lot of boats will be probably at Horseshoe Shoal looking for some bluefish. So far, I haven't heard any place that's really, in the Sounds, super solid.
Well, I've caught a few while quote unquote targeting striped bass.
Yeah,
I've,
and
caught
they're
a half
probably
dozen.
bigger, and they're probably bigger, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. 8, 7,
That's
8
the
pounds.
best.
So, but
Yeah.
in today's standards, that's a good.
Yeah.
Good
Well,
size
it's like,
bluefish.
what did someone once told me? Oh, somebody from the vineyard. They called them the vineyard 20-pounder, which weighed 12. And bluefish. But of all the fish that people overestimate, bluefish are one of them.
Bluefish and tuna. Dave, remember that actual 20-pounder we caught probably 20 years ago in Montauk? It was probably like 40 inches. No, we caught a bluefish. No, it was in North Carolina.
North Carolina. Yeah, that was.
It was the biggest bluefish. It just kept it. You couldn't tell where it started and where it ended. It was so.
That was scary.
And that probably wasn't even that probably wasn't even quite 20 pounds, but it just
that was a scary big bluefish. Yeah. That was the one. You want to release it? Do you want to release it? No, you release it. I don't want to go near that thing.
It was swearing at us in multiple languages. It was a big fish.
now going over to the positives, as Amy said, scup fishing from shore, great. There's a fish with northern kingfish. Certain towns, the jetties to Falmouth, I guess, have been fishing well. And in fact, a really good note was, according to Evan over at Eastman's in Falmouth, told me that people have been catching some nice fluke from the jetties at the entrance to Falmouth Harbor. They've been catching some nice fluke from shore down around Minot. I've heard of some nice fluke from a lot of beaches on the south side and then on the Nantucket Sound, which is, a lot of people seem pretty happy with the fluke fishing. It's not fantastic. You're going to have to wade through a lot of small fish, but I think that's a very positive thing because, again, you've got scup, you've got your northern kingfish. Some people call them whiting. They're not technically whiting, but the same family. You've got fluke, which is always kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, fluke fishing, I would say, adjusted for the times. The fluke fishing is very good inshore. Now, I've heard it's slowed down. The big fluke south of Nantucket, I heard that's been a little slow. But, I've been, I'm really more focused on striped bass videos, filming for Salty Cape this time of year. But anytime I'm near Lucas, I'll snip around just to send a couple of feeler jigs and some teasers down. And I haven't used bait once for fluke this year and caught 2 or 3 keepers without trying very hard. I caught a bunch of shorts, but if you were to go out targeting fluke, you'll throw a bunch back, but you will catch keepers, and that's awesome. That makes me happy. It is. It's good.
Yeah, it is very good. So now to the big thing you talked about, the shoals. Well, I'm just gonna. My house will probably get burned down or whatever, but who cares? I was at Middle Ground this morning. I was the only boat there. Had a charter.
If you're the only boat, I feel like it's fair to talk about,
Okay. Well, I was there for a while by myself. I have never seen more birds, squid, and fish at Middle Ground than I saw this morning. I mean, it was how long Middle Ground is, 3 miles, 4 miles, whatever. There were flocks of birds. It was like an Alfred Hitchcock.
What kind of birds? Like little birds, big birds, both birds?
Both. Terns. And I really felt like what I was seeing was there had to have been sand eels probably getting churned up. The squid were feeding on the sand eels. But the squid explosions, I mean, I just love watching squid. I mean, it's got to be, it goes back to the last week of Crazy Voices, but it's going to be bad. I always joke, it's got to be an awful life being a squid in a rip when, talk about panic film. I mean, the place would explode and you'd look at it. It was phenomenal. Now, I am going to be honest. We were fly fishing, which in that north wind was very difficult. We hooked up once or twice, but we didn't actually bring a fish to the boat. And I changed flies 5 or 6 times. I was very attentive to the color of the squid. But when I was coming back in,
I've noticed a lot of darker squid this year.
now these were all light. These were all the white or light pink. And
sorry, don't mean to interrupt. Yeah,
no. But these were also juvenile squid. I mean, from the size of the top of your pinky to maybe 4 inches. You know, they were real small. Okay, these were, I mean, definitely, and they were lighter colored. And we fly fished, and we never even picked up the spinning rod, which I kind of regret because, you know, but all I kept thinking is, they said, all right, so I'm going to pose the question to Mike. Okay, if you're in that situation, you get those, you know, just like I described, acres of fish, squid. Go, Captain Hogan, catch them. Because I didn't see many people catching.
So were you catching?
I was fly fishing. No.
So I.
So I'm saying I wouldn't know.
Okay.
You know?
So in fairness, everybody, I did chat with Dave on the way over, and what I didn't hear in his description was where Dave was talking about how challenging it was to, and maybe I missed it because there's people walking around here. I'm at my marina. There's a lot, and I feel a few, so I may have missed it. But Dave found himself in a challenging situation where it should have been lights out,
Absolutely.
but it wasn't.
No.
Okay, and so we've all been there. And I remember years ago, I was with Captain Colin Lundholm from Cape Cod Charters, and we were on tuna that were jumping so prolifically in the school stand hills, we couldn't hear each other talk. Neither one of us could catch a fish. So now we've had 3 captains talking about this, that sometimes just shit happens. And pardon my French there. But in troubleshooting any situation, you know, I get a lot of these phone friends or family, and they've been out. Hey, I was out, and you know, I decompose the situation in this. There's one method, right? And by method, I mean, are you casting, jigging, trolling? And I'm going to add fly fishing, even though it's technically casting, it's its own method, right? And I would actually call it canal fishing. I'm digressing there. And so method, so casting, jigging, trolling, or fly fishing. Then I'm curious about the structure, right? So are you in open water? Are you on a rip? Are you on submerged boulders? Are you on deep boulders, in a channel? Are you fishing on a flat, fishing on a drop off? There's more structure, but just by way of example. So I'm curious about the structure you're fishing at. Then the next question I'm going to ask is your approach. And, you know, if you look at our playbooks, we probably have about a dozen different approaches. And that's filtered by structure. So I know if you're fishing a rip, so you've already told me you're fishing a rip and you're fly casting in this situation. So your structure is probably limited to stemming the tide in the rip or drifting through the rip and repositioning. And then I'm going to ask about your technique. Now, technique is a combination of what lure you've chosen to use and how you're working the lure, right? And so, you know, you could, you know, soft bait's a perfect example. You can fish a soft bait 100 different ways. So fishing the swing and a rip, for example, is a technique. And are you fishing a dead drift? Are you ripping it on the surface? And there's a lot of different variations. So technique, again, is what lure you're using and how you're retrieving it, for lack of a better word. And then I have 2 other factors I ask about: the environmental factors. And environmental stuff you can probably figure out from the dock. So that's currents, that's tide, lighting, weather, wind, you know, stuff you would get on a weather app. And then situational factors are what you would have to be there to understand. So Dave described to me in that situation that there's gulls, there's terns, there's probably sand eels, there's squid feeding on the sand eels, and then it's a whole food chain thing. So my filter of these 5 or 6 different things, to paraphrase the situation, is you stem the tide, fly casting probably with, in lure terms, something small. I know Dave, and we've fished together for 20, 30, we're not going to worry about that, decades. He's stemming the tide. I know he's casting up tide. I know he's fishing the swing. I know he's matching the hatch. with squid. And I know he probably tried matching the tide with the sand eel. Not sure what the striper's reading because Dave sensed that there were exploding, crashing fish. And he wasn't sure. He thought that it was the squid feeding on the sand eels and the stripers feeding on the squid, but who knows? And one thing I know is there's such thing as too much bait. And way back to the beginning of this podcast, Dave mentioned the term like sometimes bait is the structure, but when there's too much bait, strike like any game fish with any too much bait situation. A lot of times they just flow through the schools, and I call it. There's probably a better term. Call it bucket feeding. They're just going through with their mouth open and closing. So the fact that you're using a lure that's probably scaring the bait away is like almost working to your disadvantage. Now, in that situation, so if say we diagnose the situation as there's too much bait, and for sake of argument, that's how I'm going to diagnose the situation. I want to focus fish that are adjacent to the melee. Am I pronouncing that right? The melee, and fish that are like separated, lost like a little bit of ways from like where the massive amount of bait on. There's a fear of missing out if they a FOMO if they see your lure, and so in that situation, I would see the fish crashing, and I'd be maybe fishing up tide, maybe an extra couple 100 feet in the smooth water, fishing on the other side of the rip behind. I'd be looking for fish that weren't in the fray of things, but adjacent to it. Sometimes, in my opinion, those are easier to catch. But that's after, and Dave mentioned that he didn't fish conventional gear. And today I was in my gardens watching the trees going. So it was windy. So Dave was at a major method disadvantage with the fly rods. But as a spin tackle angler, I probably wouldn't have altered my approach all that too much. I would have fished up in the smooth water at the edge of the rip and then behind the rip in the turbulent water. Yep. I probably wouldn't have changed my approach other than where I'm positioning in front of the rip. Yep. I would have played around with my technique quite a bit. And in that situation, I would view it as topwater plugs and soft baits. Those are the two categories. Because I also know middle ground, another situational factor there is it's weedy. So if you were to mess around with swimming plugs, that sort of thing, you would weed up. So that's how I filter down to topwater soft baits and topwater plugs. You want the top, you're sort of like above the weasel, but I would have dead drifted. Dead drifting is when you cast up tide and you're reeling a little bit, but more just to stay in contact with the line. So if you feel it hit, you feel it tap, tap. And so a dead drift, it's like a stunned or dead bait, just drifting down the tide, hoping that something picks it up. I would have started there. I would have fished something fast on the surface, something slow on the surface. Again, I'm working through my techniques, right? I would have started with the plugs and then do all the same things with soft baits. And I just would have rotated through things. So I'd fast on the surface, slow on the surface, dead drift, big lures, little lures, imitating colors. So we're squid, so it'd be like amber or a translucent olive or translucent white or translucent pink. So that's the imitator spectrum. And then there's attractor colors, which are like the extreme opposite of what's going there. You're looking for a react. Then maybe like a bright orange surface pencil, dark black plug, or just something contrasting. So now I've fished all the techniques. I've fished both lure sizes. I've fished imitators. I've fished attractors. And so I'm running out of options here. And then, the last thing, which I started with, is assuming knowing Dave's, an excellent, I fished with Dave. He's an excellent angler. I learned something from Dave every time I fished with him. I'm assuming he did all that. And the last thing Mike Hogan would do in that situation is fish for fish I don't see. So if I see him here, I'll cast there. If I see him there, I'll cast here. And again, I'm just hoping to find a fish that's like not directly in the fray and just feels like he's missing out and doing something wrong and taking the low hanging fruit. Yeah. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's how I would have approached that situation.
And the one thing that with the way you went through everything is we talked about environmental factors. And sometimes looking at the environmental factors kind of makes you realize that the technique you're using, and for example, the wind was going with the current today. And trying to get a swing, even with the 350 grain sinking line, soon as the fly hit the water, it was like behind the boat. You really couldn't get, and the fellow I was fishing with is a good caster, and we just couldn't get
And for those of you that don't fly fish, a 350 grain line is a weighted fly line designed to sink. It's not the heaviest weight you can get, but it's meaningful in that it will sink at, it's a sinking line, but you can go heavier than that, but it does sink. So it just, for those of you that
and we
don't
changed colors. I went white and light pink flies. I went bright orange. I went bright pink. I went mixes. And so we kind of played around with that. But the one technique that you talked about, which again, how many times have I talked to you about this year and in the past that I don't do enough is I don't fish subsurface enough. And I kept kind of wondering to myself, okay, what would it have been like to actually drift into the rip? And I kept thinking, I kept thinking slow tail. Okay. I mean, a slow tail.
Oh, that's a great slow tail situation.
A slow tail is a great squid imitation. Okay. Because especially the size of the squid we're talking about. And
so a slow tail is like a paddle tail, but instead of a paddle, it has two curly tails pointing in opposite directions. It doesn't take much to move them.
Yeah. And I was thinking about that. But I mean, and honestly, here's the other thing about technique. Okay. So we're fly fishing. 30 knot winds, current with the wind, can't get a swing. I like fishing floating lines. I said, what about, and I said, there's no way there's no way. First of all, I'm going to be able to cast a floating line.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, the answer would have been, put the fly rod down, pick up the spinning rod. Okay. I know it's okay to be a purist and it's about that. But, the conditions were tough. They weren't suited. And I'm thinking of what you were talking about. Okay, what I could have gone with it, the hoagie. Now, for me, of course, what I'm going to throw first, and that's going to be a popper or a dog walker because I'm all about topwater. And that limits me. And I think that's important too when you're looking at a situation. Don't limit yourself or don't get frustrated if you do limit yourself and you're not as consistently successful as you want to be, because
So I'm gonna interrupt here. So because you're limiting yourself, so to speak, in this conversation to topwater, whereas Mike Hogan, I own a whole lure company. I like to spread the love for the different types of lures. So I'm probably more inclined. I try not to have favorites. I'm attached to all the different lures, so I have that about me. But by getting down and under the top water, again, you're targeting fish that aren't keyed in on something specific. So I'm not competing with a real squid swimming that a striped bass is specifically looking at a specific squid. I'm just under with fish, quote unquote, looking for something. Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to insert that dynamic.
No, I think that's the thing is. And again, I think that's, I appreciate what you're saying about me as a fisherman, but I mean, that is probably my preeminent, actually I have a lot of them, but which is limiting myself. Okay. And not adjust.
But you're not limiting yourself. You know what you like, right? And so if you like what you like, then just do that. And
for me, that's okay. But when you're a guide and you have people on your boat, you need to consider a number of different factors. And I mean, we have to be honest. I mean, topwater fishing is, working plugs, topwater, working soft plastics, topwater, working flies, topwater. In my opinion, is the most challenging way of doing it. I mean, it's sort of, for me, it's challenging because there are a lot of different factors. However, a good subsurface fisherman, a fisherman knows how to use epoxy jigs, who knows how to use sand eel jigs, who knows how to use paddle tails, who knows how to use slow tails, who knows how to get down to those fish that are finicky, but also knows how to use those lures when it's windy, when the current is going, crazy. I think that is certainly worthwhile. So, but anyways, I have to say, what are we? 4th of July is next week. The number of fish that I saw and the amount of squid that I saw, because everybody told me that this squid season, for the people who are looking to just get squid to eat, was not particularly good. Well, if they leave, given what I saw with the juvenile squid, it was pretty wild. And
Yeah, I'm less worried about the future of squid now. After seeing all the squid, bowl sounds. Yeah.
yeah, good luck to that. So, I mean, I think that's good. And I think that the shoals will be good. Tomorrow's fishable. You were talking about the weather. Going real quick to the weather. I think Sunday definitely looks like it. And Monday are days that you probably, unless you have a really big boat, it's going to be a little bit gnarly. But tomorrow may work out. But I was just shocked because I just was at Monomoy yesterday, and now I'm down at Middle Ground, and it's like, oh my God, this is as good as Monomoy. And I certainly wasn't expecting,
Yeah.
so
And it's sea bass. I haven't heard much. I know whenever I just stop and drop on wrecks in eastern Nantucket Sound, I'm doing okay, but I haven't heard much. And it is still a little early for Vineyard Sound down towards K Head and Squibby and Norton's Point, anywhere, say from West Chop West. Is the sea bass fishing materialize that down that way? Have you heard? Or do you know? I haven't known anybody that I just don't know.
Yeah, no, I've talked to a couple of guys who commercially sea bass, and they've actually started moving in that direction. Deeper water.
Oh, good.
Bigger fish. Water temperatures definitely have seen an increase. Although the water temperatures in the Sound, again, I don't keep logs, so I can't. I don't. So I can't give a historical, but it does seem like the water has stayed a little bit cooler in these Sounds. So it was really good to see. I mean, the amount of life, I love, it's like Monomoy yesterday. You were talking about the life. We saw a shark. We don't know what it was, but we saw a shark fin, go right by us. There were seals working. There were birds everywhere. And so see that kind of life anywhere, to me, is exciting sometimes as catching fish. Because
and this is a good way to conclude, because I feel like we're running out of our time here. But I remember ever since I was a little kid, my dad, who I grew up fishing with my dad, and he was not an angler. Fishing was something that he enjoyed doing with his kids, and he took it seriously enough to, be safe out there and actually have an intention of catching a fish. And we caught plenty, and I sort of was a breakaway kid and got obsessed with it. But he said this to me 10 million times, which I never really understood as a kid until now, more so as a grown up, is fishing is a great excuse to be on the water. And like, when else would you be standing waist deep in an estuary at sunrise? When else would you be casting an eel at midnight down the Elizabeth Islands? Or when else would you be, at Monomoy with birds and multiple different, and just the stuff you see out there. And, I love that fishing is a great excuse to be on the water. If you go with that adventure mindset, and again, reading Blues by John Hershey, I could have spent a whole hour on that book alone. But if you're into that sort of thing, get it. It's on Amazon still. But it's just a lot of cool stuff to see. And, I just love viewing each trip as an adventure, not knowing what you're going to find. And if your plan didn't work out, the Cape Cod is probably the greatest inshore fishing and offshore greatest fishing destination in the world. If you think about how it's it's a nexus point between like southernmost migration of fish like cod, halibut, and haddock, and southernmost migration, and northernmost of like yellowfin tuna, blue marlin, striped bass, all these, the complex of what, just there's always going to be something. And going with that mindset of a plan A, B, C, and D, it's always going to be a great day on the water.
Well, I always love, the one thing I love about your videos is when you spend some time on the whales feeding and the dolphins and porpoises, and just the life you see when you're out there in the tuna grounds. I mean, that's just the coolest thing. You mentioned the eels, so real quick, Evan said the eel sales are up, which is usually a pretty good sign that things are happening down the Elizabeths. Nighttime in Woods Hole, guys are soaking some eels. They're also doing some eel fishing up in Buzzards Bay. apparently there's been a reasonable live eel bite. The reason I mentioned eels is Mike and I have an ongoing thing about eels, and
Dave's a big catch and release guy, as I am. And Dave, what's always my question for Mr. Catch and Release?
how do you catch and release with live eels?
Well, how do you release the eel?
How do you release the eel? Right, exactly. So I mean, like I said, yeah, the great catch and release with the live eel. Oh, and the other line from Mike is, so what makes a striped bass more valuable than a live eel? Doesn't the eel have a right to its existence? As we go into my philosophy, and he starts going into
Dave's easy to turn the screws on.
Yeah, right. So that there are some fish down there. A lot of guys are fluking down that way and doing okay. But I would say you're talking low light conditions are going to definitely be your best bet on the islands. Or, I mean, if you're looking for really big fish, Woods Hole was, that is again, similar to Middle Ground, kind of crazy. And if you are looking bluefish, apparently Buzzards Bay, there are some roving schools of big blues up towards the canal, and they've got some really good fluking up there. I mean, that's like
up by Mashney Island that way.
Yeah. Their season, it got better last year, and I guess it's continued this year. And again, a lot
there's very few fisheries left on Cape Cod that I haven't tried. And I think technically I've caught fluke by Mashney Island, but not on purpose. Technically speaking, targeting fluke in Mashney Island area, Buzzards Bay, is probably the last thing I haven't done Cape Cod fishing wise. Funny. Yeah. I got to put that on my bucket list for this.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So a lot of good fishing, a lot of different techniques, a lot of different methods, and the key thing is, Mike. Actually, I was reading the playbook, Mike's playbooks, because when I'm doing reports, I try to refer to some of the things that Mike talks about. And Mike's big thing is his bag approach. Keep it simple. Last year I used to carry 4 full bags of boxes onto my boat. This year I'm down to 2. I mean, progress.
Making progress.
I'm making progress. Okay. Mike's fishing me long enough to know that I always have to have everything in case I need it. And I never.
Well, you're under 500 pounds now, so that's good.
Exactly. But the thing about Mike's technique is that and if there's one thing I really related to in the playbook was that first, I think it was the inside page in the front about, how you can limit. I shouldn't say limit. Limit suggests a negative thing. How you can reduce the amount, filter out the tackle that you carry, but not limit your range of techniques. And I think that's a really, I think just for that alone, the playbook was worth it for me. Just because that's my, again, one of my great weaknesses. Too much stuff. I gotta have.
And too many options is a problem, right? You have, cognitive
dissonance. It's called
dissonance. Yeah, cognitive dissonance.
Which in my case is cognitive dysfunction. Right? Yeah.
But, so I have a thing so I own a fishing lure company. I own Salty Cape, and I have kids, and I own a business, and all that stuff. So my filter, I have a lot of filters, like personal filters. If I can't load the boat one trip, it's too much gear. If I can't get ready for any trip in under 25 minutes, it's too long. So I like to have a jump bag gear, minimal amount of stuff. But so I'm a big fan of just having sort of one representative lure for whatever, so I went through my method, platform, approach, technique, environmental situation, and environmental factor and a situational factor. And as long as I have all the possible scenarios covered, I'm happy. And I keep my colors filtered. I've got the bones, olives, pinks, and ambers, and dark. And, and so I have a handful of types of lures and sort of a small assortment of sizes and colors. And I know each of them like the back of my hand. So when a situation changes, I'm not thinking about the lure. I'm thinking about the situation. And once I know where in the water column and how I want it to look, then I don't have to think anymore because there's probably just one option for that in my very filtered system. And that's, it's not a great way to sell a ton of lures.
No, but
but I practice what I
the
preach.
thing
But
is,
it's
yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'm sure I've read it somewhere, and so I'm not claiming this as my own. To the effect that you're better off knowing how to use few lures really well than having a ton of lures that you have no feel for any of them because you're always grabbing something different. And I think that's really true. I mean, it's like last year, and then you get confidence in it. We've talked about that. How, I mean, if I don't use something, I've got to you have to develop confidence in it. And, so, I mean, I carry all the whole Hoagie line, but I don't have to carry, I shouldn't say, I don't have to carry every color of the epoxy jigs. Okay. Which during algae season, I carry 6 boxes of epoxy jigs, sizes, colors, everything else. And so I say, well, which one do you? Well, yeah, I could get into what I use because the other ones are there. But just in case, Mike says to me, oh, yeah, the blue was hot. And it's like, oh, God, now I got to get blue. So, but it's better that you know how to fish up in an epoxy jig or know the different techniques for fishing an epoxy jig.
Yeah. It's funny. Again, we should probably wrap up because we're taking a long time here. But in order of importance, I would say your approach is number one. Your technique approach dictates like how you're interacting with structure. Number two, your technique in terms of where in the water column, lure size, and retrieve style is the second most important. And then like once you get to size, water column, and speed, and then within that range, a lot of stuff will work. And so you can really simplify, also being in the right place, the right time. So that's that goes without saying.
Me, to me, the best time to go fishing is anytime. I know. I have guys who they scan even inshore water charts and velocities of the current and all that other stuff. And it's like, I was brought up in a generation which was fishing was instinctual. Okay. We didn't have all the, the technology, and I'm not poo-pooing technology, although I do use a flip phone. So
you beat me to that, Dave.
What's that?
You beat me to the punch on the flip phone.
Yeah. You were going to give me that. Yeah, it should be in the Smithsonian. I know. But, there is something to be said for instinct. Time on the water.
Yeah. And that's where the adventure comes in, right? You go out, you diagnose the situation, you crack the code. And to me, that's where the joy, this is probably a good way to end. That's where the joy of fishing happens. Yeah. Otherwise, it's a bit like reading the end of a book before the beginning, and at least in my opinion. So
Captain Mikey's little voice says, crack the code and dial it in.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you're still with Blabbering On, we appreciate you listening to Dave and Mike's show, going back and forth. Not too much chop busting on this episode, but bound to happen at some point. That's one of the things we do best. And as they say in Massachusetts, when someone likes the other person by how mean they are to them. And Dave, thank you. Thank you again for joining me on this, and really look forward to next week. And maybe we can get a chance to wet a line together next week. And
I promise, Mike, I'm going to work on the babbling.
No, don't change a thing. We want you just the way you are. Yeah. And all right, folks, thanks again. And
have a good weekend.
We'll see you next week.
All right. Are you spending the weekend on the Cape?
Hang on.